The enduring legacy of Little House on the Prairie is rooted in its portrayal of a wholesome, agrarian lifestyle, yet recent revelations have forced a complete reassessment of its production history. Melissa Gilbert, who famously embodied the character of Laura Ingalls, has recently articulated a profoundly unsettling realization regarding her formative years on set. For decades, the audience perceived her on-screen evolution as a seamless transition from childhood innocence to adult wisdom, never questioning the power dynamics hidden in plain sight. The catalyst for this shift in perspective was not a premeditated critique of the show, but rather a reflexive response to modern societal discourse. When high-profile public debates regarding the treatment of minors ignited, Gilbert found herself engaging in the same self-reflection as millions of other women. This collective movement, fueled by the hashtag #IWas15, compelled individuals to confront the reality of their own youth. For Gilbert, this meant looking at her own history with the clinical, often painful, detachment of an adult reflecting on her own developmental stages. As she searched for archival images from her teenage years, she was confronted with a stark visual contradiction. The photographs that once served as nostalgic artifacts of her early career suddenly appeared to her as evidence of a lost childhood. She saw a 15-year-old girl, an age she now recognizes as inherently vulnerable, positioned in intimate, scripted scenarios that she did not have the maturity to fully process at the time. This juxtaposition of professional duty and personal reality created an internal dissonance that she had suppressed for years. This realization is particularly poignant when considering the sheer volume of hours Gilbert spent in the public eye. She did not merely act, she grew up under the intense, unrelenting spotlight of global television fame. The viewers who tuned in weekly were not just watching a character, they were witnessing a genuine human life in its most fragile state of transformation. The audience's emotional investment in the character of Laura Ingalls essentially blinded them to the reality of the actress behind the role. The discomfort Gilbert expresses today is not an indictment of her past, but a maturation of her own self-perception. She acknowledges that at the time of filming, the environment felt conventional, even mundane. The historical narrative of the Ingalls family provided a shield of legitimacy that allowed production to proceed without intense scrutiny regarding the emotional welfare of the teenage lead. It was a different era, one where the boundaries between professional ambition and personal development were often blurred or ignored entirely. It is essential to understand that this analysis does not seek to villainize the creators or co-stars, but rather to highlight the systemic nature of child acting in the 20th century. Young performers were often tasked with navigating complex emotional landscapes, love, heartbreak, and intimacy, well before they were developmentally prepared to do so. The professional expectation was absolute compliance with the script, leaving very little room for the processing of those intense, simulated emotions in a healthy, adult manner. When Gilbert viewed these images as a woman of 61, the internal reaction was visceral. The physical sensation of nausea she described stems from the recognition of her younger self as an object of narrative convenience. She was essentially a child being asked to simulate adult experiences, which, when viewed through a modern lens of consent and psychological safety, reveals a profound lack of protection for the child actor's psyche during the most critical stages of growth. The role of the child actor is often characterized by a high degree of isolation. Despite being surrounded by a large crew and cast, Gilbert was in effect the center of gravity for the show, yet she was also arguably the most vulnerable person on the set. Her ability to maintain her professional demeanor while simultaneously navigating her own adolescence is a testament to her resilience, but that resilience should not be mistaken for a lack of personal impact or latent emotional distress. Modern audiences are now in a position to reevaluate these classic narratives with a nuanced understanding of these dynamics. We no longer view the romance between Laura and Almanzo solely through the lens of a historical adaptation. We see it as a complex human situation involving two individuals at vastly different life stages. This shift in perspective is what makes this story resonate so strongly in the current cultural climate, as it reflects a wider desire to protect the integrity of childhood. The transition from a cherished memory to critical analysis is a difficult journey for many fans. There is a desire to keep our childhood favorites untarnished by the complexities of reality. However, Gilbert's honesty invites us to do something more meaningful, to recognize that these shows were real lives being lived in real time. By acknowledging the discomfort she felt, she validates the experiences of countless other child stars who have similarly felt the weight of their early careers. The cultural significance of the hashtag #was15 cannot be overstated in this narrative. It served as a bridge between the public's perception of age and the personal reality of those who lived through it. By sharing her own internal conflict, Gilbert elevated a personal memory into a broader conversation about how we, as a society, interpret the autonomy and protection of minors within the entertainment industry. The scenes themselves, while professionally executed, carry a different weight now that we understand the internal state of the actors involved. When we watch those early episodes, we aren't just seeing characters, we're seeing two actors tasked with bridging a massive maturity gap. The professionalism they displayed is impressive, but it masks a deeper underlying awkwardness that was, at the time, kept strictly behind the scenes to maintain the sanctity of the show's wholesome reputation. It is also important to consider the historical context in which Little House on the Prairie was created. The narrative was based on literature that reflected a different century, and the production team felt a sense of duty to remain faithful to that timeline. This faithfulness, however, created a moral friction that the cast and crew had to navigate on their own, often without the benefit of the psychological support systems that are more common in modern film and television sets. Gilbert's reflection is a powerful example of how the passage of time changes the meaning of our lived experiences. What was once seen as a triumphant moment of acting achievement is now seen as a complex, potentially taxing chapter of her life. This doesn't negate the success of the series, but it does add a layer of human depth that makes the story more compelling, more tragic, and ultimately more honest than we ever knew. The public reaction to her comments has been a mix of support and introspective debate. Fans are not necessarily turning away from the show, but they are certainly viewing it with a more critical eye. This is the hallmark of a mature audience, one that can appreciate the artistic value of a classic while also acknowledging the human cost that was occasionally paid behind the camera. The resilience required to step onto a set, perform, and maintain that level of output while growing up is rarely fully appreciated by the audience. Gilbert's career trajectory is a remarkable one, not just for the roles she played, but for her ability to survive and thrive despite the immense pressure placed on her during her teenage years. Her recent statements serve as a reminder that her success was not without its internal challenges. As we continue to analyze the cultural impact of Little House, it is vital to keep this new information in mind. The story of Laura Ingalls is no longer just a tale of prairie survival. It is also a modern story about the intersection of fame, childhood, and the long-term psychological impact of early industry involvement. This dual perspective is what keeps the show relevant and worthy of continued discussion. The silence that Gilbert maintained for decades was a product of the industry's culture at the time. To speak out would have been seen as unprofessional or perhaps even ungrateful, given the immense platform the show provided. Her willingness to finally address these memories shows a shift in her own personal agency, as she no longer feels beholden to the expectations of the past. This analysis is not meant to ruin the legacy of the show for its fans, but to deepen it. By engaging with these facts, we are acknowledging the complexity of the art we consume. We are recognizing that the individuals behind these beloved characters were humans first and performers second, and that their experiences were shaped by the environments in which they worked. Ultimately, Melissa Gilbert's transparency serves as a beacon for other child performers, encouraging them to tell their own stories and to re-examine their own histories. It is a necessary conversation, one that moves us closer to a more empathetic understanding of the human condition and the realities that exist behind the polished facade of classic television. The professional relationship between Melissa Gilbert and Dean Butler was framed by the necessity of the script, but the lived experience was defined by the silent tension of their age difference. When one considers the mechanics of filming a television romance, it becomes clear that there is a vast gulf between the finished product and the reality of the filming day. On screen, the chemistry appeared effortless, almost faded, but that effortlessness was the result of two actors working diligently to bridge a gap in maturity that they both keenly felt. Dean Butler's own reflections on this period have been surprisingly candid, often echoing the sentiment that the situation was, at times, inherently awkward. He was entering his 20s, a time of life marked by burgeoning professional confidence, while Gilbert was navigating the turbulent waters of mid-teenage life. The misalignment in their developmental stages created a dynamic where the professional requirements of the script often forced them into a proximity that felt uncomfortable for both parties involved. The production team, while focused on the narrative integrity of the show, was not necessarily focused on the emotional comfort of the actors beyond their basic requirements. This was typical of the industry during that period, where the production schedule and the director's vision took precedence over the nuances of actor comfort. The fact that the story was a period piece based on historical characters provided a veneer of legitimacy that perhaps made it easier for producers to overlook the personal realities of the lead performers. Even the most celebrated scenes, such as the infamous Sweet 16 episode, were navigated with a sense of trepidation that the audience never witnessed. That moment, which was the culmination of a long-term storyline, was intended to be a romantic milestone. Instead, for the actors, it was a test of their ability to suppress their own discomfort in favor of the script's demands. They performed with a professionalism that is, in retrospect, quite staggering given the circumstances of their age difference. The pressure to perform was also exacerbated by the expectations of the network and the fans. Little House on the Prairie was a massive ratings driver, and the development of the romantic arc was seen as essential for maintaining audience interest. The actors were not just playing characters, they were carrying the weight of a franchise on their shoulders. This level of professional pressure is immense for an adult, let alone for a girl who is still finishing her high school years. Butler has often spoken about his desire for things to have been different, specifically regarding their shared age. This acknowledgement is significant, as it shows he was aware of the imbalance even as it was occurring. He understood that the story would have been much easier to tell, and much more natural to perform, if there had been a closer parity in their ages. That they managed to sell the romance to millions is a testament to their skill as actors, not necessarily to the comfort of the situation. The behind-the-scenes atmosphere was one of disciplined, if sometimes strained, collaboration. Every take was an exercise in focus, requiring the actors to stay in character despite the underlying knowledge that their dynamic was not as aligned as the story suggested. It is this tension, invisible to the viewer, that makes the behind-the-scenes reality so much more complex than the fairy tale version of the show that many fans hold in their minds today. Michael Landon's presence on set as a mentor and producer added another layer to the environment. He was a dominant figure, one who enforced a high level of discipline. While his protection of the younger cast is well documented, it is also clear that this protection was focused on their safety and professional performance, not necessarily their emotional navigation of the more adult themes they were being asked to portray. The story of Landon throwing Butler across the barn is a fascinating anecdote because it highlights the sheer intensity of the set. It was a space where physical demand was expected and where discipline was absolute. For a young actor like Butler, learning the ropes under such a demanding figure was a crucible that shaped his career. It also underscores that the environment was not built for sensitivity, but for output. When we consider the power dynamics at play, it becomes easier to see why the cast felt the way they did. The producers and directors held all the cards, and the young actors were in a position where they were expected to deliver the scenes as written. There was no room for discussion about the comfort of the performers when the show's success was on the line. This is the reality of the entertainment industry, and it is a reality that often goes unexamined in favor of the final result. The camaraderie among the cast was undoubtedly a source of strength, but it did not fully shield the actors from the unique challenges they faced. Gilbert and Butler, while respectful of each other, were effectively caught in a script that required them to navigate a high-stakes emotional performance while they were individually in very different places in their lives. The maturity required to handle this situation is something that is rarely discussed in the context of their performances. The audience, of course, was oblivious to these dynamics. They saw the end product, which was polished, edited, and scored to heighten the emotional impact of the romantic scenes. They didn't see the retakes, the exhaustion, or the quiet moments of discomfort that occurred between the director's calls. This is the magic of film and television, but it is also the source of the disconnect that we are exploring in this analysis. The reflection by both actors in their later years provides us with a clearer picture of what it was like to grow up on camera. By speaking out, they are giving us permission to look at these scenes with new eyes. We are now able to see the effort, the professionalism, and the hidden struggles that went into every frame. This knowledge doesn't diminish the show, rather, it makes the human achievement behind the screen even more significant. The historical timeline of the Ingalls family provided a framework, but it was not an excuse for the lack of focus on the emotional well-being of the performers. The fact that the story was historical allowed the production to bypass certain moral questions that would have been front and center if the show had been set in the modern era. This is a point of analysis that is crucial for understanding how the show functioned. Every scene, every hug, and every kiss was a deliberate act of performance, not a reflection of real-life feelings. This is a distinction that is often lost on audiences who tend to conflate the character with the actor. By addressing this, Gilbert and Butler are helping to demystify the process and highlight the work that goes into creating a compelling narrative under pressure. Their ability to maintain their professional relationship throughout the years is also a notable aspect of their story. Despite the potential for lingering resentment or embarrassment, they have navigated their history with grace. This, in itself, is a testament to the level of maturity they were required to develop while working under the intense scrutiny of the show's production. When we look back at these moments, we are not looking back at a crime but at a cultural norm that was prevalent in the industry. It was a time when the needs of the production were paramount, and the nuances of the actor's development were secondary. That we can look back at this now and recognize the issues is a sign of our own cultural growth as an audience. The story of their time on the show is a microcosm of the larger experience of child actors in the entertainment industry. It is a story of sacrifice, growth, and the quiet, often ignored labor of the performer. By continuing to examine these stories, we are gaining a better understanding of how the industry has evolved, and how we, as viewers, can better appreciate the work of those who perform for our entertainment. The legacy of Little House on the Prairie is secure, but our understanding of that legacy is becoming richer and more comprehensive. We are moving from a state of unquestioning nostalgia to one of informed appreciation. This is a positive development as it allows us to engage with the material on a deeper level while still honoring the achievements of the cast and crew. In conclusion, the on-set dynamic between Gilbert and Butler was a complex interplay of professional duty, personal growth, and unspoken tension. By acknowledging these factors, we are not just analyzing a show, we are analyzing the human experience of those who were tasked with bringing it to life. It is a story that deserves to be told with the nuance and depth that we have explored here today. The enduring popularity of Little House on the Prairie ensures that its impact on television history will be studied for generations to come. However, the recent disclosures regarding the filming of its most iconic romantic moments provide a critical lens through which to view that history. The transition from childhood to adulthood is a universal experience, but for Melissa Gilbert, that transition was inextricably linked to the expectations of a global audience and the mandates of a television production schedule. This analytical reassessment does not necessitate a cancellation of the past, but rather a more honest engagement with it. When we watch the show today, we're viewing it with the knowledge that the sweet romance was a performance, a construction built upon the professional labor of two people at vastly different stages of life. This realization adds a layer of depth to the viewing experience, forcing us to acknowledge the human effort required to sustain the fiction. The cultural shift regarding the protection of minors in media is perhaps the most significant takeaway from this entire conversation. We now have a much sharper focus on the power dynamics inherent in the industry, and a greater expectation that these dynamics must be managed with care. The fact that this is even a discussion topic today shows how far our collective understanding of these issues has come since the 1970s and 1980s. Fans who revisit the series now find themselves in a unique position. They can still enjoy the narrative, the music, and the wholesome setting, but they do so with a newfound appreciation for the complexities of the production. They are no longer just passive viewers, they are informed observers who can distinguish between the character's journey and the actor's reality. This is a much more engaged and authentic way to interact with a piece of cultural history. The responsibility of the audience is to recognize the humanity of the performers. By doing so, we move away from the objectification of actors and toward a relationship based on mutual respect. This shift in perspective is what Gilbert's recent reflections have ultimately facilitated, as she has invited her audience to see her not as an icon of the past, but as a person with a story to tell. The role of the director and producer, as exemplified by Michael Landon, also stands in a new light. We can acknowledge his contribution to the show's success while also noting the limitations of his approach. The disciplined set was effective for production, but it was not designed for the modern standard of emotional safety. This dichotomy is a central theme in the evolution of television production. As we look to the future, it is clear that the stories of child actors will continue to be a subject of intense focus. The industry is changing, with more emphasis on the mental health and development of young performers, but the lessons from the past, the lessons learned by Gilbert and her peers, are the bedrock of this change. Their experiences are the roadmap for a safer, more sustainable industry. The #I was15 became a rallying cry because it touched on a fundamental truth. The vulnerability of the mid-teens is a period that must be handled with the utmost care. For Gilbert to recognize this in her own history is a profound act of personal and professional closure. It allows her to reclaim the narrative of her life and to define it on her own terms, rather than letting it be defined by the characters she played. There is a sense of liberation in this, both for the performer and for the audience. The veil of the television perfect family is lifted, revealing the real, messy, and fascinating people underneath. This is not a loss of magic but an enrichment of the story. The reality is far more compelling than the fantasy ever was because it reflects the truth of the human condition. We should also consider the broader impact of this analysis on the way we consume other forms of media. When we approach old movies or television shows with a critical eye, we are not trying to be revisionist, we are being intellectually honest. We are acknowledging that context changes over time and that the values of the present can help us better understand the artifacts of the past. The conversation that Melissa Gilbert has sparked is one that is far from over. It is a conversation about memory, about the nature of fame, and about the way we treat the most vulnerable participants in the entertainment economy. It is a conversation that is necessary if we are to grow as a society and as an audience that values the integrity of the people who entertain us. What does it mean to be a fan of a show that we now see through a lens of potential discomfort? It means that we can appreciate the craft of the storytelling while acknowledging the challenges faced by those who created it. We don't have to choose between enjoyment and critical thinking. We can do both simultaneously. That is the mark of a sophisticated and mature approach to media consumption. The story of Laura and Almanzo will continue to be told, but it will be told with the understanding that the actors involved were navigating their own path through life. This is the new legacy of the show, one that is rooted in truth, resilience, and the power of individual perspective. It is a legacy that is arguably much stronger than the one we had before. We must commend the courage it takes to speak out about these issues. For someone who has been a public figure for their entire life, sharing such a personal reflection is a risk. Yet, the positive response from fans shows that they are ready and willing to hear the truth. They are not looking for the perfect story, they are looking for the real one. The influence of Little House on the Prairie is not just in its ratings or its longevity, but in the discussions it continues to trigger today. It remains a focal point for our understanding of television's golden age and its many complexities. By continuing to explore these themes, we ensure that the show remains relevant to new generations. As we move forward, let us remember that every actor on screen has a story that is not included in the script. They have their own memories, their own feelings, and their own growth processes. When we view a performance, we are seeing the final product of a human experience that is often much deeper and more complicated than we could ever imagine. The lessons we learn from Gilbert's experience will hopefully lead to a more conscious and supportive environment for all performers. The shift in our cultural awareness is palpable, and it is largely driven by the willingness of people like Gilbert to step forward and share their perspectives. This is the real impact of her reflection. Ultimately, we are all part of a larger story that is still being written. The way we interpret our cultural heritage is a reflection of who we are today. By choosing to engage with this story with honesty and empathy, we are showing a commitment to a more thoughtful and respectful future. The journey of Melissa Gilbert is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She has navigated the highs and lows of the industry with dignity, and her voice is one that continues to shape the conversation in meaningful ways. We owe it to her and to all performers to listen to their stories and to learn from them. In conclusion, the legacy of this show is now one of profound human reflection. We have moved from the surface-level appreciation of a period drama to an exploration of the deeper, often hidden truths that define the life of an artist. It is a journey that we have taken together, and one that has brought us to a more complete understanding of the world of Little House on the Prairie.